It wasn't just another horror movie. It was a nightmare pulled straight from childhood. Locked basements, broken phones, and whispers from the dead. The Black Phone wasn't sleek or supernatural fantasy. It was raw, personal, and terrifyingly real. Born from Joe Hill's short story and Scott Derrickson's own haunted memories, it became a film where the past wouldn't stay buried and the phone never stopped ringing. Behind the mask, the balloons, and the basement were stories far stranger than what made it to screen.
I know you're scared.
These are 20 weird facts about The Black Phone, a horror film stitched together with memory, fear, and things that never let go. Number 1. One of the strangest inspirations for the film came from director Scott Derrickson's real life. As a child in Denver, he lived near a house where a boy was murdered. The killer's shadow loomed over the neighborhood, a whispered warning that stained his memory for decades. That unease of knowing evil could live right across the street fed directly into the Black Phone. The grabber wasn't just a character. He was the embodiment of every whispered story, every "don't talk to strangers," every time a child walked home with eyes over their shoulder. Derrickson poured his own childhood fear into the film.
Hang it up.
He described moments from his youth, bullying, physical punishments, unstable parents, as fragments that became the texture of Finney's fear and the film's setting. When he said that The Black Phone was the most personal movie he had ever made, he wasn't exaggerating. It was a ghost story, and the ghost was his past. Number 2. The design of Ethan Hawke's grabber mask was handled by legendary effects artist Tom Savini in collaboration with Colossum Studios, and its creation was steeped in both classic horror history and practical constraints. Savini drew inspiration from silent horror iconography, works like The Man Who Laughs, especially for the expressive grin. An important design requirement, even with the mask on, Hawke's eyes had to remain visible. The filmmakers believed that's where the grabber's menace truly lives. Number 3. Ethan Hawke almost said no to playing the grabber, not because of money or schedule, but because he didn't want to play someone irredeemably malignant. He was concerned about embodying a villain so deeply evil and whether that would linger on him. But once he read the full screenplay and saw how the character was shaped, not just as a masked killer, but as something symbolic of fear, suppression, and how monsters are made, he accepted. What's strange here is how much even the actor playing the monster was pulled into moral anxiety over what it meant to portray this darkness. Some versions of evil are performative, but here, the performer had to weigh what it meant for himself to look into that abyss. Number 4. The writing process between Scott Derrickson and C. Robert Cargill was intense and strangely rhythmic. They wrote in shifts, Derrickson writing early in the day, Cargill late at night, and would pass drafts back and forth, sometimes overnight. Derrickson said that often one would wake up to the other's changes and feel both uneasy and excited. These edits sometimes added darker emotional beats, sometimes weird supernatural touches, sometimes sharpening the horror. The weird part is how the story felt like it had a mind of its own. They weren't just expanding the short story, they were listening to something beneath it and letting it guide them. It's almost like the voices calling through the Black Phone in the movie had their own say in how the narrative was built. Number 5. Production faced a moral dilemma. How do you make a film about child abduction without exploiting the very thing that makes it horrifying? Derrickson walked a razor's edge, consulting with child welfare experts and ensuring the young cast felt protected at all times. They kept the most disturbing elements off-screen and leaned on implication rather than depiction. Madeline McGraw's parents were present for her toughest scenes, and crew members went out of their way to create a supportive environment. In fact, the set became strangely playful between takes. Mason Thames and Madeline McGraw would play games, Ethan Hawke would joke around out of costume, and the oppressive basement set was filled with laughter when the cameras weren't rolling. The contrast was surreal, a movie drenched in fear, filmed in an atmosphere of safety. And that careful balance is why the horror on screen feels authentic, but never exploitative. Number 6. The grabber's van, beat up, black, and filled with ominous props, wasn't just set dressing. It had to feel like an extension of him. Derrickson drew inspiration from real abduction cases in the 70s, when parents would warn children not to go near strangers offering candy. The van became a rolling trap, with black balloons as its sinister calling card. Filming inside it was nerve-wracking. Mason Thames had to perform scenes of being chloroformed and dragged, which required meticulous stunt coordination to keep him safe. The balloons themselves were a nightmare to wrangle, popping mid-take, deflating too soon, or blocking the camera. Yet those fleeting images, the van door sliding open, the black balloons filling the frame, became some of the film's most iconic. They were simple, chilling, and unforgettable. One glimpse was all it took to make audiences' stomachs sink, because everyone knows the black balloons mean the grabber is here. Number 7. Ethan Hawke used silence as a weapon. Most villains choose scenery with long speeches, but the grabber's menace came from what he didn't say. Hawke deliberately dropped his voice to a whisper, let pauses stretch, and allowed silence to suffocate the air between lines. On set, this unnerved even the crew. Mason Thames said that when Hawke walked into the basement in full mask, speaking barely above a breath, it felt like all the oxygen left the room. The unpredictability of that performance, sometimes gentle, sometimes explosive, was what made him terrifying. Hawke later explained he wanted the grabber to feel like a child playing games with death. And what's scarier than a predator who treats cruelty as playtime? It wasn't about shouting, it was about the dread of not knowing what he might do next. Number 8. The phone calls with the dead weren't just creepy dialogue, they were carefully layered with ghostly audio effects that bent reality. Scott Derrickson worked with sound designers to give each child a unique sonic fingerprint, using static, distortion, and faint echoes that made their voices sound like they were clawing their way out of another world. In some cases, the actors recorded their lines in small, confined spaces to capture a muffled, desperate quality. Mason Thames often didn't hear the final mix until playback, and when he did, it shook him. He later said it felt like real spirits were whispering into his ear. That sound design was subtle, but it haunted viewers long after the credits. Close your eyes, and you can almost hear it. The crackle of the line, the faint voice of a child who should be gone, and the ringing that never stops. Number 9. In Joe Hill's original short story, the grabber described himself as a part-time clown, but in the film adaptation, that was changed to part-time magician. Hill explained this shift was intentional to avoid visual or thematic overlap with It, Stephen King's famous clown story. The change is just one word, but it shifts how the character feels. Less directly clownish, more weird, more ambiguous in performance and in identity. Number 10. The mask creation process was very weird. When designing the grabber's masks, by Tom Savini and Jason Baker, they made life casts of Ethan Hawke's face during the COVID pandemic, some taken in his home office due to travel and safety constraints. Because of those limitations, the mask molds ended up having small asymmetries and quirks, padding pressure, minor fit issues that under normal circumstances might be discarded. But here, those imperfections were embraced. They contribute to how off the masks feel. Slightly unbalanced, strange in ways you may not consciously notice, but which add subconscious creep. Number 11. Derrickson has expressed a strong affinity for Super 8 film, not just as nostalgia, but because of its inherent creepiness. He said his dad had a Super 8 camera, and that messing around with it as a kid, shooting little films, test shots, left him with a love for how imperfect, grainy, flickering Super 8 feels. He deliberately used Super 8 film stocks and tested various stocks for parts of the black phone to evoke that memory-distorted, dreamlike, half-heard horror feeling. The weirdness comes in how those visual residues, grain, flicker, light leaks, make certain scenes feel seen through memory or through fear, not through clean objective eyes. Number 12. The design of the grabber's mask is more complicated and creepier than people realize. It wasn't just one mask. There are multiple masks, smiling, frowning, mouthless, each used in specific scenes to signal something about the grabber's mood or power. For example, that mouthless mask forces the audience to focus on his eyes.
Chew a soda, then I'll come back.
Or lack thereof, making them feel unmoored, like trying to read a face without its usual cues. And the mask had to allow Ethan Hawke's eyes to be visible at all times, because Hawke's eyes are central to how the grabber conveys menace. Strips of felt, careful sculpting, wide eye sockets, all those choices amplify the weirdness. You're seeing a monster, but also seeing the man behind it. Number 13. Derrickson infused the screenplay with many small childhood memories. Not just generic nostalgia, but exact little moments. In The Black Phone, there is a scene where Finney's friend says something in a school bathroom. Derrickson revealed it comes directly from what a tough kid in his elementary school once said to him. Also, there's a scene in which Finney watches The Tingler, a 1959 William Castle film, on TV. That was one of the first horror movies Derrickson remembers seeing, and the horror of black and white film suddenly bleeding into color. Blood left a burn in his mind. He said that image never let go, and that it helped shape psychologically what horror felt like to him. Number 14. The mask itself became a character, but filming with it wasn't easy. The set was brutally hot, and Hawke often struggled to breathe through the heavy latex. Between takes, he'd rip it off, sweat dripping, gasping for air. But on camera, that suffocating effect became part of the terror. Hawke leaned into the discomfort, making his breathing shallow, erratic, almost animalistic. That mask wasn't just a prop, it was a prison for him too. Derrickson and Savini wanted the mask to feel old old, theatrical, like something pulled from a trunk of cursed carnival gear. Its cracks, its faded paint, its modular design, it all hinted at a man whose personality was fractured, switching masks to fit his moods. The audience never knew which grabber they'd get. The trickster, the punisher, the executioner. And Hawk's suffering behind the mask only amplified the menace radiating from it. Number 15. Speaking of that phone, it was more than a creepy prop. The rotary relic that sat on the wall of the grabber's basement became the beating heart of the movie. Every call Finney received was a conversation with the dead, but on set, it was a technical nightmare.
Baseball, here.
The phone had to be wired for sound cues, timed perfectly with child actor Mason Thames' reactions. Sometimes the crew would prank him, calling through the line with goofy voices before switching back to sinister whispers. Thames has said the phone became a lifeline for him too, because filming such intense, isolating scenes took a toll. When the phone rang, he never knew what direction Derrickson might throw at him next. For audiences, it was the anchor of the supernatural. For Thames, it was both a tormentor and a secret friend. And just like in the story, the phone had a voice all its own. Number 16. Casting the child actors was one of the most nerve-wracking parts of production. The black phone lives or dies on the shoulders of kids who have to sell both terror and resilience. Derrickson searched for months before finding Mason Thames and Madeline McGraw. What's eerie is how natural they were, not just as siblings, but as survivors. McGraw in particular gave a performance so raw during her prayer scene, screaming at God in fury, that the crew was left stunned into silence. Derrickson said it was one of the most powerful things he'd ever filmed, and it came from a 9-year-old. But even that moment almost didn't make it in. The studio worried it was too harsh, too blasphemous, but Derrickson fought to keep it. And thank goodness he did, because it grounded Gwen in truth, the anger of a child who refuses to let her brother vanish without a fight. Number 17. The film almost didn't happen at all. Derrickson was originally set to direct Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. When creative clashes with Marvel forced him to step away, he pivoted to the Black Phone, a smaller, darker project he could fully control. In a way, the breakup was a blessing. Instead of CGI spectacle, Derrickson got to channel his energy into something personal and terrifying. The Black Phone was shot in just 33 days with a modest budget of $18 million. Pocket change compared to Marvel's hundreds of millions. Yet it went on to gross over $160 million worldwide, proving that intimate horror could stand shoulder to shoulder with superhero blockbusters. Derrickson himself called it the most creatively satisfying decision of his career. He traded one multiverse for another, the endless fractured universes that live inside trauma, memory, and fear. Number 18. Violence in the Black Phone is brutal, but rarely graphic. That choice wasn't about pulling punches, it was about suggestion. Derrickson believed the scariest horrors happen in your imagination, not on the screen. Instead of showing the murders, he left us with the aftermath. Blood on the walls, the broken spirits of the children calling through the phone, the sheer dread in Finney's eyes. Ethan Hawke himself admitted the restraint made the grabber scarier. Because you never see what he does in detail, you imagine it. Your brain fills in the blanks with nightmares worse than any special effect. That's why the movie lingers long after it ends. It doesn't rely on gore, it relies on atmosphere, implication, and the shadows in your head, and those are always harder to escape. Number 19. The Black Phone also leaned heavily on practical effects. That iconic moment where the phone's cord becomes a weapon wasn't just movie magic, it was stunt coordination at its finest. Mason Thames actually learned the moves, rehearsing over and over with the stunt team until he could believably strangle a grown man nearly twice his size. Ethan Hawke, to his credit, let Thames go full force in certain takes, insisting the fight look desperate and brutal. They filmed the sequence with minimal cuts so that the struggle felt raw, messy, and real. No flashy choreography, just the awkward, terrifying violence of survival. Watching that scene, you're not just seeing Finney fight back, you're seeing a boy discover his own strength for the first time in the ugliest way possible. And all of it came from the choice to keep things practical, dangerous, and brutally authentic. Number 20. The Black Phone wasn't expected to become a phenomenon. A small-budget horror film released in the shadow of blockbusters. It could have easily been forgotten. Instead, it exploded. Audiences praised its tension, critics called it a modern classic, and word of mouth carried it far beyond its studio's expectations. It tapped into something primal, the fear of vanishing, the power of memory, and the hope that even in darkness you can fight back. What began as a short story became a box office triumph, a horror tale that proved small films could still pack a giant punch. And perhaps the strangest fact of all, the Black Phone will not be done ringing, because if there's one thing we've learned, it's that the phone never really stops. Sometimes, it just waits. The Black Phone should have been a small, forgettable ghost story, but instead, it rang louder than anyone expected. It terrified, unsettled, and left audiences with the uncanny sense that danger might be hiding just across the street. From Ethan Hawke's mask work to Derrickson's childhood shadows, it became a modern classic of fear built on whispers of the past. And maybe the creepiest part? The phone isn't done ringing yet. The story might not be over, because in Derrickson's world, some calls never stop coming. If you enjoyed these weird facts, make sure to like the video, comment which one creeped you out the most, and subscribe for more behind-the-scenes horrors that prove truth is always stranger than fiction.